For God's sake, Abigail, when are you going to give me grandchildren? I nearly choked on my coffee, Laura's shrill voice piercing through the peaceful Sunday brunch I'd been enjoying. My mother-in-law's eyes bored into me from across the table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on the white tablecloth. Laura, we've talked about this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ben and I are focused on our careers right now. We're not ready for kids. Not ready? Laura scoffed. You're 30, dear. Your biological clock is ticking. Tick-tock, tick-tock. I felt my cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. I glanced at Ben, silently pleading for support, but he was suddenly very interested in his Eggs Benedict. Mother, please, Ben finally mumbled, not meeting anyone's eyes. This isn't the time or place. Laura waved her hand dismissively. If not now, when? You two have been married for 3 years. It's time to start a family. I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head. Laura, I appreciate your concern, but our family planning is between Ben and me. Now how about we change the subject? How's your garden coming along? Laura's lips tightened into a thin line, but she reluctantly began talking about her prized roses. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. As we left the restaurant an hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Sarah. Hey, Mama-to-be, when are we going shopping for cute maternity clothes? I groaned, shoving the phone back into my purse. It seemed like the whole world was conspiring against me today. You okay, Abby? Ben asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I forced a smile. Yeah, just tired. Let's go home. The drive back to our apartment was silent, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy between us. As we walked through the front door, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the couch, closing my eyes. Abby, Ben's voice was hesitant. Maybe my mom has a point. We're not getting any younger and... Don't you start too, I snapped, my eyes flying open. I can't deal with this from you right now. Ben held up his hands in surrender. Okay, I'm sorry. I worry sometimes that we're missing out on something important. I sat up, running a hand through my hair. Ben, we've talked about this. We both agreed that we wanted to focus on our careers first. Has that changed for you? He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. I don't know. Maybe. It's just, seeing Michael with his new baby, it makes me wonder what we're waiting for. I felt a pang in my chest at the mention of my brother's newborn. The image of Michael's beaming face as he cradled his daughter flashed through my mind. I get it, I said softly, but we're not Michael and Sarah. We have different goals, different timelines, and right now I'm not ready to give up everything I've worked for. Ben nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He leaned down to kiss my forehead. I'm going to take a shower, he murmured before heading to the bathroom. I sighed, leaning back into the couch cushions. As I shifted, something hard poked into my thigh. Frowning, I reached between the cushions and pulled out a small, glittering object. An earring. A delicate gold hoop with a tiny diamond charm. My heart stopped. It wasn't mine. I turned the earring over in my palm, a cold feeling settling in the pit of my stomach. Where had this come from? And more importantly, who did it belong to? The sound of the shower running suddenly seemed very far away as I stared at the unfamiliar piece of jewelry, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. The shrill cry of a newborn pierced the air, and I felt my heart constrict. My brother Michael beamed with pride as he cradled his tiny daughter Emma in his arms. "Want to hold her, Abby?" he asked, his eyes shining. I hesitated, then nodded, carefully taking the bundle into my arms. Emma's warmth seeped into me, and I felt an unexpected longing bloom in my chest. "She's beautiful," I whispered, gently rocking her. "You're a natural," Sarah, Michael's wife, said with a smile. "When are you and Ben going to join the parent club?" I forced a laugh, handing Emma back to Michael. "Oh, you know us, career-focused as always." But as I watched my brother and his wife coo over their daughter, I felt a shift inside me. Maybe it was time to reconsider our priorities. Later that night, I found Ben in his home office, hunched over his laptop. "Hey," I said softly, perching on the edge of his desk. "Can we talk?" He looked up, surprised. "Sure, what's up?" I took a deep breath. Seeing Michael with Emma today, it got me thinking. Maybe we should start trying for a baby. Ben's eyes widened. "Really? I thought you wanted to wait." "I did, but..." I hesitated. "I don't know, something's changed. What do you think?" To my surprise, Ben's face lit up. Abby, I've been wanting this for a while now. I just didn't want to pressure you. I blinked, taken aback. You have. Why didn't you say anything? He shrugged, looking sheepish. I know how important your career is to you. I didn't want to be like my mother, constantly nagging about grandchildren. I laughed, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Oh, Ben, we really need to work on our communication. He stood up, pulling me into his arms. So, we're really doing this? We're going to try for a baby? I nodded, a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling up inside me. Yeah, we are. The next few months were a whirlwind of ovulation tracking, prenatal vitamins, and carefully timed encounters. We threw ourselves into the process with the same determination we applied to our careers. But as weeks turned into months with no positive pregnancy test, the initial excitement began to wane. The pressure mounted, turning our once passionate lovemaking into a scheduled chore. Maybe we're trying too hard, Ben suggested one night as I tossed another negative test into the trash. I sighed, collapsing onto the bed. Maybe, or maybe there's something wrong with one of us. Ben sat beside me, taking my hand. Let's give it a few more months. If nothing happens, we can see a specialist. I nodded, trying to ignore the gnawing worry in my gut. As we approached the 1-year mark of trying, the strain began to show in other areas of our lives. Work became a welcome distraction, and I threw myself into a big project, often staying late at the office. One evening, I came home to find Ben waiting for me, a serious expression on his face. Abby, we need to talk, he said, his voice tight. My heart raced. What's wrong? He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. I feel like we're drifting apart. This baby thing, it's consuming us. Maybe we should take a break from trying. I felt a surge of anger. A break? After all this time and effort, we can't just give up, Ben. I'm not saying give up, he said, his voice rising. I'm saying we need to focus on us for a while. When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about ovulation or pregnancy tests? I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. He had a point. Fine, I said, deflating. What do you suggest? Let's go out tomorrow night. No baby talk, no work talk, just us. I nodded, forcing a smile. Okay, that sounds nice. But as I headed to the bathroom to get ready for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. The earring I'd found months ago flashed in my mind, and a cold tendril of doubt curled around my heart. What if there was more to Ben's suggestion than he was letting on? The sterile smell of the fertility clinic made my stomach churn as Ben and I sat in the waiting room. After a year of trying, we'd finally decided to seek professional help. The tension between us was palpable, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Abigail and Benjamin, a nurse called our names, jolting us back to reality. We followed her to a small office where Dr. Patel, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, greeted us with a warm smile. So you've been trying for a year without success, she said, reviewing our file. Let's start with some basic tests to see what we're dealing with. The next few weeks were a blur of blood draws, ultrasounds, and uncomfortable procedures. Ben and I barely spoke during this time, the strain of our situation weighing heavily on us. Finally, we found ourselves back in Dr. Patel's office, awaiting the results. Well, she began, her expression neutral, we found some issues that could be contributing to your difficulty conceiving. My heart raced as she explained the findings. Low sperm count for Ben, potential endometriosis for me. It felt like a punch to the gut. What are our options? Ben asked, his voice tight. Dr. Patel outlined various treatments from medication to IVF. My head spun as she spoke, the reality of our situation sinking in. As we left the clinic, Ben turned to me. I have a late meeting. Will you be okay getting home? I nodded, too numb to argue. Watching him walk away, I felt more alone than ever. That evening, I found myself at my parents' house, seeking comfort in my mother's presence. Oh, honey, Mom said, pulling me into a hug as soon as she saw my face. What's wrong? The story spilled out of me, the fertility issues, the growing distance between Ben and me, the mysterious earring I'd found months ago. Mom listened patiently, her brow furrowed with concern. Abby, have you talked to Ben about how you're feeling? About your suspicions? I shook my head. I'm afraid of what I might find out if I push too hard. She took my hands in hers. Sweetheart, a marriage can't survive on secrets and suspicion. You need to have an honest conversation with Ben. I knew she was right. but the thought of confronting Ben filled me with dread. When I got home that night, I found Ben in the kitchen, nursing a glass of whiskey. "Where have you been?" he asked, his tone accusatory. "At my parents'," I replied, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. "Ben, we need to talk." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "About what?" "About us. About this distance between us. About—" I hesitated, then plunged ahead. "About the earring I found on our couch months ago." Ben's face paled. "What earring?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped, my frustration boiling over. "A gold hoop with a diamond charm. It's not mine, Ben. Whose is it?" He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You've been sitting on this for months? Suspecting me of what exactly?" "Of cheating," I shouted, tears pricking my eyes. "Of giving up on us." Ben's expression hardened. "That's rich, coming from you. You're the one who's been distant, throwing yourself into work, barely looking at me." We glared at each other, years of unspoken resentment hanging in the air between us. Finally, Ben spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "You want the truth? Fine. I've been offered a promotion. In London. I felt like I'd been slapped." "London? When were you planning on telling me this?" He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "I don't know. I've been considering my options." The implications of his words hit me like a tidal wave. He'd been making plans. Big, life-changing plans, without me. "Get out," I whispered, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. Ben looked startled. "What?" "Get out," I screamed, grabbing the nearest object, a framed photo of us on our wedding day, and hurling it at him. It shattered against the wall as Ben ducked, glass raining down on the kitchen floor. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and left, the door slamming behind him. I sank to the floor, surrounded by the broken pieces of our life together, wondering how we'd ever put them back together, or if we even should. The days following our explosive fight blurred together. Ben and I danced around each other, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. We slept in separate rooms, ate at different times, and avoided eye contact when our paths crossed. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table reviewing work documents, Ben cleared his throat from the doorway. "Abby, we need to talk," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I looked up, steeling myself. "About what? Your secret job in London?" He winced. "No, actually, I want us to go out tomorrow night, to Finnegan's pub." I blinked, caught off guard. "Why?" "There's someone I want you to meet," he replied, not quite meeting my eyes. A cold dread settled in my stomach. "Who?" "Her name is Roxy. She's a colleague." The pieces started falling into place. The earring, the late nights at work, the emotional distance. I felt sick. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. "I'll meet your colleague." The next evening, I found myself perched on a bar stool at Finnegan's, nursing a gin and tonic. Ben sat beside me, fidgeting nervously. "There she is," he said suddenly, waving to someone behind me. I turned and felt my world tilt on its axis. A young woman, she couldn't have been more than 25, was walking towards us. She was beautiful, with long blonde hair and sparkling green eyes. But what caught my attention was the slight swell of her belly, barely noticeable under her flowing top. "Abby, this is Roxanne," Ben said, his voice strained. "Roxy, this is my wife, Abigail." Roxy's smile faltered as she looked between us. "Oh, It's nice to meet you, Abigail. Ben's told me so much about you." I felt like I was watching the scene from outside my body. "Has he now? Funny, he's never mentioned you." An awkward silence fell over us. Ben cleared his throat. "Why don't we sit down?" We moved to a booth, the tension palpable. I watched as Ben unconsciously leaned towards Roxy, his body language screaming intimacy. "So, Roxy," I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness, "how long have you been working with my husband?" She glanced at Ben before answering. "About 8 months now. We're on the same project team." 8 months, I repeated, my mind racing. It all made sense now. The changes in Ben's behavior, the mysterious earring, the growing distance between us. "Abby," Ben started, his voice low and serious. "There's something we need to tell you." I laughed bitterly. "Let me guess. You're in love, and that," I nodded towards Roxy's belly, "is yours." The guilty looks on their faces confirmed my worst fears. "I'm so sorry, Abigail," Roxy said, tears in her eyes. "We never meant for this to happen." "But it did," I spat, my anger rising. "While we were trying for a baby, struggling through fertility treatments, you were off knocking up your little office fling." Ben reached for my hand, but I snatched it away. "Abby, please. I know this is a shock, but—" "A shock?" I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Finding out my husband is a lying, cheating bastard isn't a shock, Ben. It's a goddamn tragedy. Heads were turning in our direction, but I didn't care. Years of frustration and pain were pouring out of me. So what's your plan? I demanded. Move to London with your pregnant mistress? Live happily ever after while I'm left picking up the pieces? Ben stood up, his face pale. Abby, I'm sorry, I never wanted to hurt you. But yes, Roxy and I, we want to be together. I want a divorce. The word hit me like a physical blow. Divorce. The end of our marriage, our dreams, our future. I looked between them. Ben, the man I'd loved for years, and Roxy, the woman who'd stolen him away. In that moment, something inside me hardened. Fine, I said, my voice cold and steady. You want a divorce? You've got it. But don't think for a second that I'm going to make this easy for you. With that, I turned and walked out of the bar, leaving my old life behind. As the cool night air hit my face, I realized that this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. The harsh fluorescent lights of the lawyer's office made my head throb as I signed the final divorce papers. Ben sat across from me, his face a mask of guilt and relief. I couldn't bear to look at him. That's everything, our lawyer, Mr. Thompson, said. The division of assets is settled, and the alimony payments will begin next month. I nodded, my throat tight. Is that all? Mr. Thompson glanced between us. Unless there's anything else you'd like to discuss? No, Ben said quickly. I think we're done here. As we left the office, Ben reached for my arm. Abby, I jerked away. Don't. Just don't. Without another word, I walked away, leaving behind the shattered remains of our marriage. The drive to my parents' house was a blur. I found myself on their doorstep, my suitcase in hand, before I even realized where I was going. Mom opened the door, her eyes widening at the sight of me. Abby? Honey, what's wrong? I collapsed into her arms, sobs racking my body. It's over, Mom. Ben and I, we're divorced. She ushered me inside, calling for Dad. They listened in stunned silence as I poured out the whole sordid tale, the affair, the pregnancy, the betrayal. Oh, sweetheart, Mom said, pulling me close. I'm so sorry. Dad's face was thunderous. That no-good son of a... Henry, Mom warned, but I could see the anger in her eyes, too. The next few weeks passed in a haze of grief and anger. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office and bringing projects home. Anything to keep my mind off the gaping hole in my life. One evening, as I sat at my childhood desk reviewing case files, there was a soft knock at the door. Come in, I called, not looking up. It was my brother, Michael. Hey, sis, thought you could use some company. I managed a weak smile. Thanks, but I'm fine. He perched on the edge of the bed, studying me. You know, it's okay not to be fine, Abby. What you're going through, it's huge. I felt tears prick my eyes and blinked them away furiously. I just feel so stupid. How did I not see it coming? Michael sighed. You trusted him. That's not stupid, Abby. That's love. A sob escaped me, and suddenly I was crying in earnest. Michael moved to sit beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. Let it out, he murmured. It's okay to grieve. As my tears subsided, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. You're right, I said, wiping my eyes. I need to stop hiding and start healing. The next morning, I woke with a new sense of purpose. I called my boss and took a week off work. Then I booked an appointment with a therapist. As I was getting ready to leave for my first session, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a courier holding a large envelope. Delivery for Abigail Carter, he said. I signed for the package and opened it, my heart racing as I recognized the letterhead of the fertility clinic. Inside were the results of our final round of tests, the ones we never got around to discussing before everything fell apart. My eyes scanned the document, widening as I reached the conclusion. According to the results, Ben was the one with fertility issues. Severe ones. The implications hit me like a ton of bricks. If Ben was nearly infertile, how could Roxy be pregnant with his child? My mind raced. Could she have been lying? Was the baby even Ben's? I sank onto the couch, the test results clutched in my trembling hands. This changed everything. For the first time since that fateful night at the bar, I felt a spark of something other than pain and anger. It was a dangerous, thrilling feeling, the desire for revenge. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over Ben's number. Should I confront him with this information? Or should I bide my time, waiting for the perfect moment to expose their lies? As I sat there, poised on the precipice of a life-altering decision, I realized that the path I chose now would define not just my future, but the kind of person I wanted to be. The question was, who did I want to be? The wronged wife seeking justice, or the woman who rose above the betrayal to reclaim her life? With a deep breath, I made my choice. The crisp white envelope sat on my kitchen table, mocking me with its innocence. Inside was an invitation to Ben and Roxy's wedding. My hands shook as I read the flowery script, each word a dagger to my heart. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, tossing the invitation aside. The audacity of them to invite me, as if we were all still friends, made my blood boil. I paced the room, my mind racing. It had been 6 months since the divorce, and I'd been slowly piecing my life back together. But this threatened to unravel everything. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend Sarah. "Did you get it too? Can you believe they're actually inviting people from the office?" I felt a surge of anger. Not only were they flaunting their relationship, but they were doing it in front of all our colleagues. My finger hovered over Ben's number. I was tempted to call him, to scream at him for his insensitivity. But then my eyes fell on the fertility test results, still sitting on my desk where I'd left them months ago. A plan began to form in my mind, dark and tempting. I picked up the phone and dialed a different number. "Dr. Patel? This is Abigail Carter. I need to discuss something with you. It's about my ex-husband's fertility test results." An hour later, I sat in Dr. Patel's office, the test results spread out before us. "You're certain about this?" I asked, my heart pounding. Dr. Patel nodded gravely. "The results are clear, Mrs. Carter. Your ex-husband's sperm count and motility are extremely low. The chances of him fathering a child naturally are less than 1%. I leaned back, letting the information sink in. "And there's no chance of a mistake?" "We ran the tests twice to be sure," she confirmed. "I'm sorry, I know this must be difficult to hear." I laughed bitterly. "You have no idea." As I left the clinic, my mind was whirling with possibilities. Ben was practically infertile, which meant, "The baby isn't his," I whispered to myself, the realization hitting me like a freight train. I drove home in a daze, barely noticing the familiar streets. Once inside, I poured myself a large glass of wine and sank onto the couch, my thoughts a chaotic mess. Part of me wanted to call Ben immediately, to expose Roxy's lie and watch their perfect little world crumble. But another part, a colder, more calculating part, whispered to wait. I pulled out my laptop and began to research. Paternity tests, legal rights, the implications of fraud in a marriage. The more I read, the clearer my path became. Hours passed, and as the first light of dawn crept through my windows, I sat back, a grim smile on my face. I had a plan. I would attend their wedding. I would smile and congratulate them, play the part of the supportive ex-wife. And then, when the time was right, I would reveal the truth and watch their house of cards collapse. But first, I needed proof. Irrefutable evidence that would leave no room for doubt. I picked up my phone and dialed another number. "Michael? It's Abby. I need your help with something. How good are you at hacking into medical records?" My brother's silence spoke volumes. "Abby, what are you planning?" I took a deep breath. "Something that might destroy lives, including my own. But I can't let them get away with this lie. Will you help me?" There was a long pause before Michael sighed. "Okay, sis, I'm in. But promise me you'll be careful. This sounds dangerous." As I hung up, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was someone I barely recognized. Determined, fierce, maybe even a little frightening. "I promise," I whispered to my reflection. "But careful isn't going to cut it anymore. It's time to fight fire with fire." I picked up the wedding invitation, running my fingers over the embossed letters. In just a few weeks, I would have my revenge. And nothing, not even my own conscience, was going to stand in my way. The church bells rang out, a mockery of the turmoil churning inside me. I smoothed down my dress, the manila envelope clutched tightly in my hand as I stepped into the reception hall. The room was a sea of smiling faces, all gathered to celebrate the union of Ben and Roxy. My eyes locked onto Ben, handsome in his tuxedo, his arm wrapped around Roxy's waist. Her white gown did little to hide her growing belly. The sight made my stomach lurch. "Abby!" Laura's shrill voice cut through the crowd. "I'm so glad you could make it." I plastered on a smile as Ben's mother approached, her eyes gleaming with a mix of triumph and pity. Wouldn't miss it for the world, I replied, my voice sickly sweet. Laura's gaze dropped to the envelope in my hands. Oh, is that a gift for the happy couple? I tightened my grip. Something like that. As if on cue, Ben and Roxy made their way over, their faces a mask of polite surprise. Abby, Ben said, his voice strained, we're glad you came. Roxy nodded, one hand protectively cradling her stomach. It means a lot to us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was it. The moment I'd been planning for weeks. I have something for you, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. A wedding gift of sorts. I held out the envelope. Ben took it hesitantly, glancing at Roxy before opening it. What's this? He asked, pulling out the papers inside. Why don't you read it aloud? I suggested, my heart pounding. I'm sure Laura would love to hear it too. Ben's brow furrowed as he began to read. Fertility test results for Benjamin Carter. Sperm count. Motility. His voice trailed off, his face paling. What is it, darling? Laura asked, peering over his shoulder. It says I'm practically infertile, Ben whispered, his eyes wide with shock. Less than 1% chance of fathering a child naturally. The silence that fell over our little group was deafening. Roxy's hand dropped from her stomach, her face a picture of panic. But that's impossible, Laura sputtered. Roxy's pregnant. I turned to Roxy, my voice ice cold. Care to explain that, Roxy? Or should I share the results of the paternity test I had done on your prenatal screening? Roxy's face crumpled. I can explain. But Ben had already taken a step back, his eyes filled with betrayal. You lied to me? The baby. It's not mine. Heads were turning now, the whispers starting to spread through the reception hall. Ben, please, Roxy pleaded, reaching for him. But he jerked away. How could you? He hissed. How could you do this to me? To us? Laura stood frozen, her eyes darting between Ben, Roxy, and me. I don't understand. This can't be happening. I felt a twinge of satisfaction, watching their perfect world crumble. But as I looked at Ben's devastated face, a wave of unexpected emotion washed over me. This was the man I had loved, the man I had planned to spend my life with. And now... I'm sorry, I whispered, not sure who I was apologizing to. Ben, myself, or the universe that had brought us to this moment. The room was in chaos now. Guests were murmuring, some leaving, others openly staring. Roxy had collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Ben stood alone, the test results crumpled in his fist. As I turned to leave, Laura grabbed my arm. Why? She demanded, her voice breaking. Why did you do this? I met her gaze, seeing the pain and confusion in her eyes. Because the truth always comes out, Laura. Always. I walked out of the reception hall, the sounds of confusion and heartbreak fading behind me. The cool night air hit my face and I took a deep, shuddering breath. I had done it. I had my revenge. So why did I feel so empty? As I got into my car, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael. Is it done? Are you okay? I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with unexpected tears. Was I okay? I didn't know. I didn't know anything anymore. With trembling fingers, I typed back a single word. Yes. But as I drove away from the shattered remnants of Ben's new life, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. 6 months after the wedding disaster, I sat in my office, staring at the email on my screen. My hands trembled as I read it for the 3rd time. Congratulations, Abigail. The board has unanimously decided to promote you to senior partner. A knock at my door startled me. It was Sarah, her eyes wide with excitement. Abby, did you hear about Ben and Roxy? I felt a familiar twist in my gut. What about them? They're divorced. And Ben, he's been demoted. Apparently, the higher-ups felt his personal drama reflected poorly on the firm. I leaned back in my chair, a whirlwind of emotions washing over me, satisfaction, guilt, and an unexpected pang of sadness. How do you feel about all this? Sarah asked, studying my face. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. How did I feel? I'd gotten my revenge, hadn't I? So why didn't I feel victorious? I need some air, I muttered, grabbing my coat. Outside, the crisp autumn air cleared my head. I found myself walking to the park where Ben and I used to spend our Sundays. As I sat on our old bench, my phone buzzed. It was Michael. Hey sis, heard about your promotion. Congrats. Want to come over and celebrate? I smiled, picturing my brother with his little family. Thanks, but I think I need some time alone right now. Everything okay? His concern was palpable. I'm not sure. I admitted, I thought I'd feel different after everything. Michael was quiet for a moment. You know, Abby, revenge doesn't heal wounds, it just creates new ones. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I thanked him and hung up, my mind reeling. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, I saw a familiar figure approaching. My heart raced as I recognized Ben. He looked older, tired. The confident stride I once knew was gone, replaced by a hesitant shuffle. "Abby," he said, surprise evident in his voice. I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I replied, gesturing for him to sit. We sat in awkward silence for a moment before he spoke. "I heard about your promotion. Congratulations." "Thanks," I said softly. "I heard about everything else." Ben nodded, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I deserved it. All of it." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Ben, No, Abby," he interrupted. "Please, let me say this. What I did to you was unforgivable, and what you did, it opened my eyes. I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of therapy. I realize now how much I hurt you, how selfish I was." Tears pricked my eyes. "I wanted to hurt you," I whispered. "I wanted you to feel the pain I felt." "I know," he said, finally meeting my gaze. "And I did. I do. But Abby, carrying that anger, that need for revenge, it's poison. For both of us." His words echoed Michael's, and suddenly everything became clear. The emptiness I'd felt wasn't because my revenge wasn't complete. It was because revenge could never fill the void left by betrayal and lost love. "I'm sorry," I said, surprised to find I meant it. Not for exposing the truth, but for how I did it, for letting my pain turn me into someone I didn't recognize. Ben nodded, a sad smile on his face. "I'm sorry too, for everything." As we sat there watching the last rays of sunlight fade, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The anger, the bitterness that had consumed me for so long began to dissipate. "What now?" Ben asked quietly. I stood up, smoothing down my coat. "Now we heal, separately." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in years. I pulled out my phone and dialed Michael's number. "Hey, is that celebration offer still open?" His laugh warmed my heart. "Always, sis. Come on over." I smiled, quickening my pace. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. I had survived betrayal, navigated the treacherous waters of revenge, and come out stronger on the other side. As I headed towards my brother's house, towards family and love and new beginnings, I realized that true redemption wasn't about making others pay for their mistakes. It was about finding the strength to forgive others and yourself, and the courage to move forward. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning, and this time I was writing it for myself.